And as I mentioned, the story of treatment courts around the country is not all positive. We have critics, and those criticisms are sometimes based in very legitimate concerns, and sometimes they're not. But there is a conversation out there, and maybe you've seen it locally, about treatment courts that's not positive. And so we have to continue to put ourselves out there. I'm going to return to this, but it's important to understand those criticisms. So, this is what people say about treatment courts. Maybe you've heard some of this. They say other things too, but these are sort of the primary ones. And we see damaging state and national coverage. That's the New York Times. If addiction is a disease, why is relapsing a crime? And they talk about drug courts jailing people for resumed use. So it's more than just sort of getting a positive media story out of your graduation. It is part of a larger picture of the entire treatment court movement. And we do it because it moves the needle. This is the Baltimore Sun in April 2011 saying, drug courts are not the answer. Fast forward to 2019, all criminal justice should be modeled on drug courts, right? It has an impact. We chip away. And one in Billings, drug treatment courts are reaching more Montanans as governor looks to further fund them. Wow, what a headline, right? That's the story we want, and that's built on a foundation of local coverage. So, I originally had Star Wars here, but I was flipping around the other night and Jaws was on. That is my favorite movie of all time, so I swapped out. Let's think about story for a second, right? There is a formula to every single action and adventure movie or book you have ever seen or read. And it's a really simple formula. And you will recognize it in almost everything, right? There's a hero. They start out ordinary, they're downtrodden. Then something happens, they're faced with a challenge, they go on the quest. Chief Brody is out on the boat, right? He's gonna take down Jaws. And there's risk, there's a villain, there's an obstacle. In this case, a gigantic shark. And there's a transformation, right? Our hero perseveres. They're aided by friends, and they have support, and they ultimately triumph. Right? This sounds familiar because this is what you see every single day in treatment court. It is so perfectly suited to telling our stories, right? That story arc is the story arc of a treatment court alumni, or of a treatment court that maybe was struggling and then made some changes and is now doing well, or brought in a new innovation or a new technology. There's a lot of different ways you can spin a treatment court story using this formula. But I just like putting that up because we're so well suited to telling this type of story, the type of story that really resonates with people. Got it. Jaws. So a good story is going to create emotional resonance. We're trying to tell great stories. We're trying to move people into some kind of action. We want them to feel something, right? And so we're going to talk about how to tell those types of stories today. I think it's important to understand a little bit about the media, right? This is a for-profit industry. It is information and entertainment. And that's important to keep in mind when we're dealing with the media. They have a constant need for content, especially local media, right? They have to fill that newspaper every day. They've got to publish a new online story sometimes every hour throughout the day, maybe every 2 hours. They have a huge need for content, and so when you approach them with a story, as long as you're approaching the right person, and we'll talk about that, they are going to be receptive, right? They want to hear from you. They want to have a story placed in their lap because it makes their job easier. And this last one is a sort of a new phenomenon in the last 10, 15 years, but all media is created equal now. A story on the national nightly news that gets, let's say 3 million live TV viewers has the same possibility, is on equal footing as a local story that goes viral, right? A local story that goes viral has potential to reach millions of people, more than the nightly news. It's all created equal. We never know what story is gonna have a life beyond just its release on social media and elsewhere. And that can be a really good thing. I see Associated Press write about local treatment court graduations that gets picked up in 100 different outlets. So the media playing field has been leveled, but it's really important to keep it in mind, because if you're working with what seems like a relatively small local outlet, you have to treat it like millions of people can see it, because there's always that possibility. So what is news? What are they looking for? We check a lot of these boxes, right? Human interest, timeliness, proximity, anything rarity, kind of new, outside the box. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to talk about the work that we do as something new, and we're breaking the pattern. We're doing something different than the justice system has done previously, right? The media is looking for stories like that. Now, of course, we can always connect, we can find a hook for them, right? If the media is talking all about the opioid epidemic or the addiction epidemic, we have something to say about that, right? Budget cuts, elections are always a good one. That doesn't mean you have to start weighing in on candidates, but around election time, they start talking about, well, here's what this candidate's saying about justice system reform, and here's what this, that's an opportunity to weigh in. Hey, don't forget about treatment courts, right? We have a vital role to play. If there's a DWI crash in your community, that gets a lot of attention, right? It's perpetrated by someone with multiple offenses on their record. That's an opportunity to say, look, maybe this could have been prevented had we expanded our DWI court, right? So we want to connect what we do to what's being talked about in the media. I just went and looked at some Montana news 2 days ago, and these are the headlines that are currently out there. Each of these is one that you could respond to. Or you could reach out to the reporter and say, hey, I know you're covering the roundtable about the drug epidemic. Why don't you come visit our court? We're doing something really unique. So you keep an eye on the news. In fact, I was just looking at the, we'll talk about op-eds in a minute, but I was just looking at the, what is this?
The Bozeman Daily Chronicle.
Yeah, there's an op-ed about mental health, right? That's an opportunity perhaps to further that conversation through a submission of your own. So there's a couple different ways to get our messages out. Op-ed, that stands for opposite editorial, right? So most newspapers will have the editorial page, which is opinion by people who work for the paper. Then they have their op-eds, and that's where you can submit. I'll go into each one of these individually. Let's talk about op-ed a second. These are long, about 800 words. The advantage to an op-ed is that you control the message, right? You think about every word that goes in it, you get it exactly the way you want, and you submit. You can submit these cold, or you can pitch them, so you can reach out to the paper and let them know you'd like to write an op-ed, and usually they will say, great, send it to us. This is a great way to get your message across. In fact, this op-ed is by, I'll just read you the first paragraph, because I think it tonally is in line with a good op-ed. It says, as leaders of Bozeman Health's behavioral health clinical services, we want to share an update on the work that your locally owned and governed nonprofit health system is doing to support the mental health needs of Southwest Montana. You can easily see how that could be, change a few words, and we want to provide you an update on what our drug court is doing to save people's lives, right? Followed by 800 words, carefully chosen words. A letter to the editor is usually a response to something you've seen, some coverage you've seen. These are shorter, usually less than 300 words, and submitted fairly quickly in response to something. So, and you don't have to do a letter to the editor to your local paper. This is a Washington Post letter to the editor by Chelsea, a treatment court alumni from West Virginia. She saw this article about the opioid crisis. She reached out to me, she said, I have something to say about that. I said, okay, write it up, and we worked together, and it was in the Washington Post. Letters to the editor are also really important for setting the record straight. If an article comes out about your program and it is misleading, or there's something in it that is misrepresentative, this is your chance to set the record straight. And then a direct pitch. This is what you were mentioning earlier, reaching out to media and saying, we have a story for you. They love that. Sometimes you can reach out directly to the reporter. If there's a reporter in your community and they've been covering issues around addiction or the justice system, most papers will put reporter contact information on the website. Or you can reach out to an assignment desk editor. That's the other position, so assignment desk. And every web media outlet's website will tell you who that person is. And actually, I have a platform where I can look it up for any outlet in the country, so you could always email me and say, who's the assignment desk editor for KCW and Bozeman? And I'll say, here's who it is. A direct pitch is literally an email to them saying, I have a story for you, and then rather succinctly tell them exactly what it is and what they're going to get, right? I read your recent story about an increase in impaired driving in our community, right? So this is a reporter who's covering this issue. I want to reach out with a unique and timely story, right? Then it goes into one paragraph on what the story is. Here's this person, he was going to go to prison, the judge stepped in, we got him into DWI court. You tell the reporter why it's an important story, that's okay. Look, your readers this will resonate with your readers. And then Robert and the judge are both available for interviews. So you're telling the reporter, we've done the work, you just say you want to do it, judge will sit down with you, Robert will sit down with you, the story's done. That's what they love that. And of course, National Drug Court Month, I got to put a plug in for National Drug Court Month. We release a field kit, May, if you don't know, May every year is National Drug Court Month. We put a field kit out, it's got a ton of resources, sample media advisories, sample press release, event ideas, messaging. Every year I want to get it out in February, usually it's April, but we will try to get it out as early as we can next year. I really encourage you to use it. Drug Court Month's a great time to engage the media. And you can really get creative. You know, the media loves graduations, but it doesn't have to be a graduation. We see great media stories about events, community cleanups. They do this every year. They always get a ton of press. Beaverton does a participant versus staff softball game. Remember I showed that what the media is looking for and anything that's sort of out of the ordinary, right? So you got a judge, he's going to be playing shortstop in the softball game against like participants, like that's media gold. They do that, they always get press. And even this, the drug court in Nashville got a big donation from the Predators, and that became a media story. You can do the same with a grant. I see a lot of local media coverage about courts getting grants, federal grants. So, to be prepared, you know, one slide on what they named this session about media kits. You don't really need a media kit. What you want to have is have some statistics pulled aside, have some boilerplate language about what the program is. If possible, know who the media contact is for your program. Now, some of you may have really involved press support from the courts. Sometimes treatment courts are like, nope, it's just us. But try to identify someone who can be the point person for the media. Who on the team is comfortable talking to the media or has experience talking to the media? Have those people identified so that you're not scrambling when the media comes calling. Alumni. You know, if there's alumni who are still involved in your program or who come to every graduation, you know, talk to them. Say, hey, look, can we call on you if we get a request for an interview, and work with them a little bit. Alumni are incredible ambassadors. And pictures. This goes beyond just media. I see so many treatment courts have these awesome events, and they have no record of it. Find someone who is good at taking pictures, a volunteer, the spouse of one of the team members, if possible, a professional from the courts, you know, but get really high quality pictures of every event you do. You will use them. You'll use them on their website. You might use them on social. And so there are times when the media will do a story on your court and they'll need pictures and you'll have them. But that's just sort of a general event planning one. Have a photographer at every event you do. You will not regret it. And then there's press release templates. Those are included in a publication that we have that I will show you at the end. You can get it online. It's got media advisory templates, press release templates, op-eds, letters to the editor, but you can have your templates prepared. So in like 2,000 years, the art of persuasion hasn't really changed that much, right? Aristotle came up with these, and they're still basically the same. But when it comes to messaging, right, credibility, emotion or immersion, reason, what is our argument, and what is the evidence to support it, and call to action. We're going to look at each one of these. Credibility, why should anyone listen to you, right? Now this goes beyond even just media. This is any time you're out publicly talking about your program. Maybe it's at a community event, maybe it's at a graduation and you have a chance to give a few remarks and there's potential community partners in the room. Why should people listen to you? In my 15 years as a judge, I've never seen anything as successful, right? You're establishing your credibility. I've prosecuted hundreds of cases and I can tell you that outcomes in treatment courts are far better. But how do we inform the audience that we really know what we're talking about? It's all about credibility. Emotion, right? There are a lot of different ways to describe the work we do. We're going to look at some of that in detail in a second, but we should be thinking about how we move our audience, whether it's a reporter with a notepad or a room full of community partners, right? You can say, well, we reconnect families. Well, that's great, and that's resonant. Or you can say, well, the best part of my job is seeing the faces of children who've gotten their mom and dad back, right? It's taking that idea and adding a level of emotion that's going to draw people in. You know, this second one is a real quote from a treatment court alumni. You know, I was talking to her and I said, well, tell me about that, you know, that first time in court. She said, well, it was really different. You know, everyone was really nice and it was just different. I said, okay, let's do that again and give me a little more detail. And boom, she gave this description, right? And immediately you're in that moment. She's painting a picture. She's using story. So we should be thinking about these things when we message about our programs. You know, we need our data, right? We need to support our argument that we are the most effective intervention for our population. So we got to have that ready. And a call to action. This can be actually pretty tricky. Sometimes it's really going to depend on, you know, where you're delivering the message and to whom. But just ask yourself in any kind of public event or any media engagement, you know, is there a call to action we want to put out there for folks? Do we want them donating to the local nonprofit that supports our incentives? Or do we want to encourage employers to hire alumni? What is the call to action we're going for? Because after we get people emotional and empathetic, we want them to do something. So I'm going to ask you all to think about this for a second. And you can change this to if you work in a veterans treatment court or drug court. But think, if someone asks you, what is a drug court? How do you answer that? How would you answer that? Well, you think about that. One of the first, it was probably the first 2 months of the job at NADCP, we had a big national media outlet ask us for an interview. And a higher up at NADCP, who I will not name, said, okay, you know, give me all the prep, I'll do the interview. So I came up with all these questions and I wrote these long bullet talking points and handed them over. And he read them all and he said, okay, I'm ready. And he, you know, sits down for the interview. And the very first question is, so just to get it out of the way, what is a drug court? And it was a real struggle to answer that question, right? He hadn't really prepared it, hadn't really thought about it, could talk for 20 minutes on incentives and sanctions, but what is a drug court was the most difficult question to ask, right? Because there's a lot of different ways to answer it. Does anyone want to venture an answer? You don't have to. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. But, yeah?
All right, I'm cheating because this is from earlier. An alternative to incarceration that combines public safety and public health approaches to connect people involved in the justice system with individualized evidence-based treatment and recovery support services.
Oh my gosh, good poem.
I'm gonna write it down.
What session was that in? I'm just kidding.
The promise of drug courts.
Oh,
from
Carolyn,
this
yeah.
morning.
Nice. Well, so here's the thing. There is no one way to talk about it. And we need to be thinking about who we're talking to and why we're talking to them before we formulate that answer, right? Because if you're talking to a room of skeptics, how you explain to them what a drug court is going to be very different than if you're talking to a room full of judges, right? There is no one answer to this, but we have to be thinking about it. I'm sort of outing some NADCB leadership here, but I did this exercise with the board, right? The judge says, oh, I'll do it. So we sit down in front of everyone, mock interview, first question, what is a drug court? He talks for 5 minutes. He never mentions treatment, never mentions recovery. Not sure if he mentioned, it's a hard question to answer if you're not thinking about it. And we need to think about it. I can tell you that the most misunderstood elements of what a treatment court is who do we serve, how do we help them, and why is it effective? And I just throw that out there, particularly that who do we serve? Because if you explain what a drug court is, but you don't make it clear, right, who this population is, it can be misconstrued. One of the criticisms we get is that we're cherry picking easy cases, or we're full of possession cases. And I know every court's different, and that's not a statement on whether or not you're taking possession cases, but the point is, it opens the door for misunderstanding and criticism if we're not very clear.
Well, I think
right?
the who do treatment courts serve, there's a lot of answers to that. It isn't just the people in our court, but it's also our community.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And depending on the audience, you may want to expand on that, right? We serve you.
We're taking somebody who is committing crime because of their use and turning them into a taxpayer.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You could even lead with that, you know. So once you start thinking about all these different possibilities, it really opens things up. So I'm really glad you mentioned that. This is not like the definition to go with every time. This is just an example of a definition, and it wouldn't even work in many settings because it's very wordy. But who do we serve? Well, it's an alternative to incarceration for individuals involved in the justice system with a substance use and mental health disorder. So right off the bat, we're making it clear, this is for people with an addiction who are facing incarceration, not low-level offenders.
It's for educated people. It's not for Joe Blow taxpayer who's like, why is my money going here? Exactly.
This is a wordy kind of high-level definition that you would want to pick and choose when to use it. If you're writing an op-ed, maybe you could use a variation of this because it works better, I think, as a written statement than a spoken statement. Evidence-based treatment, supervision, recovery support, we save lives, we save resources, we reduce crime. Just be thinking about all the different ways you can describe the program and what you do. Every time we're out engaging with the public, whether it's through the media or at an event, even at a graduation, a lot of times that graduation room is going to be filled with folks who you may want to reach, potential community partners, stakeholders, elected officials, right? How are we going to reach them, and what message do they need to hear? Funders, skeptics, discipline-specific. What do prosecutors need to hear when we're out talking about treatment courts? Veterans is a very specific population. Messaging for them is going to be a little bit different. Legislators, right? Are we doing this through the media? Is this a community forum? Is this in a grant? And what are the messages we want to use, right? And then your job, what we need to do is match up. Audience, outlet, message. I'm back to the criticisms because, again, it is so important for us to know these criticisms because we can preempt them in our messaging, right? If we know we're criticized for cherry picking easy participants, let's work that in to our messaging. Let's dispel that myth. So I'm just going to use two examples, right? Elected officials, generally they like to hear about saving money, obviously cutting crime or public safety, accountability, evidence-based practices to some degree, right? So we might be talking to them, we might say, well, our drug court saves $13,000 for every individual we serve, money that can go to help law enforcement focus on violent criminals. Or an accountability court, right? You might not always describe drug court as an accountability court, but you might, depending on the person you're talking to, the elected official you're talking to. There's these different messaging points that are baked in to what we're saying. General public, they can a little more, we're saving lives, we're restoring families, we're restoring the community, better use of resources, right? So you might talk about it a little differently with them. We're all impacted by addiction in our community, but instead of this revolving door, we're going to break the cycle. We're going to hold people accountable, but we're going to give them treatment and support so they become productive members of the community, right? Both those definitions are saying essentially the same thing. They're just saying it slightly differently. Storytelling. Now, I mean, this is story not in like the media story we were talking about earlier. This is like a technique, right? Think about those stories throughout your career in this field that have impacted you the most. I would encourage you to write them down. Write it down, even if it's 2 pages long. You'll have it down, you can refer back to it, you can whittle it down, but we need to have at the ready the stories that are going to really bring what treatment courts do to life. So that if you're in a situation and someone's really pressing you, like, how does it work? What do we do? What do you guys do? Well, let me tell you about this case, right? And you've got it ready, and you know how to tell it, and you just deliver. Use storytelling is such a great tool. I'm going to just talk for a second about language. This could be a whole presentation, not without some pushback, I imagine, but that issue of credibility, I just want to float this out there, that we should be thinking about the language we use, particularly in different settings. Does the language we use establish or diminish our credibility? There is some research out there, this is just one example, about how stigmatizing terms can lead towards bias. Now, if I'm trying to build support in the community, right, for a treatment court, I don't want to elicit this bias, right? I'm going to think about, well, do I want to be referring to people as addicts and abusers or even offender, right? Let's think about the language we use. I think NADCP is going to be doing a little more on language to help courts kind of think through these issues. But I just want to put that out there, that the language you use is going to go a long way to either establishing or diminishing your credibility, depending on the audience you are talking to. So, interview. How many of you have done media interviews? A good amount. Okay. How was that experience? Scary. I still get scared. Yeah.
Not bad.
It's okay. Yeah. It can be very intimidating, even if it's just a small, little, short post-graduation interview. It can be intimidating. There's a couple of key rules to live by. One, always truthful. If you're unsure, you just don't say it, right? If you're even trying to come up with the stat, you know the stat. You've said it a million times, but you can't quite come up with it. Don't just throw a number out there. You don't need to. Always prepared. Ideally, every media interview you're going into, you're prepared for. In other words, it's not like post-graduation, you weren't planning on talking to the press, but here you are in front of the camera. That's going to happen. But ideally, you're prepared, right? You know the outlet. Maybe you've even looked into them. What have they written about drug courts? Are they favorable? I should know that going in so I can know what to expect. Match the message, right? Okay, I'm talking to this reporter. It's a criminal justice blog, so it's fairly knowledgeable audience, so I'm going to match my message to them. And you're in control. It can feel very out of control in an interview. And the media, they have a lot of little techniques. They'll say, can I talk to you interview your judge for 15 minutes? And then they're going to go as long as they can. They want to keep you talking, right? If you set up an interview for 15 minutes, it's 15 minutes. Less talking is generally better in an interview. because another thing they'll do is they'll ask you a question and you'll answer it, and then you'll stop, and then they'll sit there, kind of look at you. You'll be like, this is awkward, I better keep talking. So, and then you'll keep going, and that's when we can make mistakes, right? Because now we're off message, we're just talking because it's an awkward interaction. You're in control. You only say what you want to say, you only talk for as long as you want to talk. It really feels like I'm throwing various people into the bus, but I do think these examples are helpful. So there was a group that went to a state and was doing a bunch of interviews with drug court folks, and they sat down with a state chief justice, and she gave this quote. Now, I know what she was trying to say, but when you read it, and it turned out, no one had really done their due diligence to look into who this group were. This was like a very, very anti-treatment court group. And so when they got this quote from her, they released the report. This was like one of the big block quotes they pull out, right? Because it looks like what she's saying is, even if a court is saying they have low recidivism, that's not a measure of impact, right? It kind of looks like it undermines any statistic you throw out saying, well, we lower recidivism. That's not what she was trying to say, but it's just an example of like, if you're on an on-the-record interview, everything you say is going to potentially end up in a piece, and so we just have to be really, really careful. And that comes with practice and preparation. The more we practice this messaging, the more effective we're going to be. She was so pissed about this when they did that, and rightly
Was it
so.
taken out of context because in the blog says in drug court participants, so to me that illustrates that she did not say those words.
Well, yeah, that's a really good insight.
Okay.
They
So she could have been talking about anybody.
Yeah, to this day, I'm not totally sure exactly what point she was trying to make, but I know she was not trying to undermine drug court recidivism statistics. It was a matter of practice. She was wading into waters that she just hadn't sort of fully prepped before, and they made it into the big blowout quote. So you develop and practice your key message point. Stay positive, right? This is a really good technique. Some critics argue that drug courts limit the role of defense. Is that true? No, that's not true. We don't do that. No, right? Well, that's one way to answer it. But stay positive. Actually, defense attorneys are critical members of our team. Here's what they do, right? This can be a little tricky, but
So basically don't go on the defensive.
what's that?
Don't be defensive.
Right. There's no reason, 9 times out of 10, there's no reason to be defensive. Even if the question is posed as a sort of negative-based question, you're coming from a place of positivity. You know your stuff, you're doing good work, it's backed up. You're coming from a place of positivity. So there is no reason to answer this negative question with a negative, because defense attorneys play a vital role in what we do, and we can talk about that. Pivoting, right? We've all seen any presidential debate, right? The masters of pivoting, never answering the question they're asked, right? We can learn a lot, unfortunately, from watching those. But the key is to do it in a way, not like they do it, where it's so obvious, but to stay in your lane, to stay in the area where you've prepared, right? There's a concern that drug courts have been slow to embrace MAT. Is this true? Well, it's not really your job to weigh in on whether or not drug courts, by the way, is drug courts here, in this county, in the state, nationally? What are we talking about? It's not your job to speak to drug courts all over the world, right? Our focus is on ensuring treatment courts have the latest best practices. This would be an NDCP answer, but in our court, here's what we do. That's a pivot. If we take a closer look, we see. I want to point out that a pivot is your way of kind of redirecting the question to the question you want to answer, and it may not be the exact question that they have asked. Painting a picture. This comes back to that sort of storytelling idea. You have your canned stories ready to go. This is a little wordy, but this was a coordinator was describing in an interview what staffing is. Why is it unique and important and so effective for the team to meet? What is accomplished in that? And instead of sort of describing what that is, she painted a really interesting picture. Okay, we got this person who needs childcare, we need this, we do that. We're trying to figure it out, we're trying to figure it out together. Just an interesting way of answering that question on an issue that, frankly, is kind of difficult for people to understand. And then just taking it local, using your experience, right? Again, back to storytelling, a little bit of the credibility too. This is often a technique if we're talking at a national level, and there are some gaps in the treatment court research. I think that's okay to say. Rather than to bring it back to an area of comfort and an area of messaging, using personal example. I can recall a case that really shows why drug courts are so important. Here's what I've seen as 10 years as a judge. You all have, you've dedicated sometimes many years to this work, right? You can fall back on that experience to answer these questions. And give them a quote. You might even want to think ahead of time. What's that sound bite they're going to want? Because they want the quote. And sometimes these local reporters, they're just there for the quote. They'll interview you for 10 minutes and you'll speak eloquently about all this different stuff, and what they want is 2 sentences so they can get their story out. Transforming the courtroom into places of hope and healing. Instead of punishment, we offer treatment and compassion. That's a soundbite. Again, a veteran's example, right? It's a packaged soundbite for them. So this messaging, it strengthens your program, your standing in the community, and it really does protect your program when times get tough. And that happens to everyone. A note on crisis. We have a publication on crisis. I really encourage you. It's at the end. I'll show you where it is on the website. It was really born out of a terrible crisis that affected a court in Pennsylvania a few years ago, and we really learned a lot. A crisis is any situation that threatens to undermine the credibility of the program. And sometimes they occur without warning. They can be rather sudden, right? A participant goes off and does something terrible and it's all over the news. There's no way to prepare for that. A smoldering crisis is one that sort of develops slowly. Maybe there's an investigative reporter doing some work. Usually these are internal matters that spill out into public view, an HR issue, something like that. But we do need to be prepared for crisis, right? The first step, as we've said, is developing positive relationships with the media. That situation in Pennsylvania, they were saved by the fact that they had pretty good relationships with the media. And so while the state level media was beating them up, the local media was saying, no, this is a good program doing good work with a difficult population, and this situation is going to happen at one time or another. They had their back, and the community had their back. It might be good to start to think about, in a crisis communications situation, who would that team meet? Is that who's going to kind of lead that response? Is it the coordinator? Is it the judge? Is there support from the courts that can be offered? Where are the vulnerabilities, right? Can we anticipate where crisis can occur? Sometimes we can't, but where are the vulnerabilities? And adherence to best practices is one of the best prevention, right? A lot of the, what I would call crisis media situations are born out of courts that are frankly doing things that are outside of the standards. And they're getting called out on it, and they're not prepared to answer in an effective way, and that just makes it worse, and on it goes. So adhering to the standards is really critical. These are the three, we have 3 publications. The first one is a media guide for treatment courts. It goes over a lot of this stuff, but it has templates. Press release, media advisory, has a lot of this information. Managing the message during a crisis is probably the most important publication. I've had a hand in producing it in ADCP. I really encourage you to look at that. Hopefully you'll never have to deal with anything, but you will want to be prepared if you do. And then this last one is, I'll put a plug in for this. It's a sharing your treatment court story. It's a guide for participants and alumni. You know, some of our best ambassadors are participants and alumni, but they need help often in telling their stories and in understanding the decision to tell their story, right? The implications of telling your story. This publication is all about that. It's written for them. Just another note on that. You know, participants are important. Are an important part of this, and often, you know, participants can be highly effective in communicating about the program, but we need to be really careful in using participants, and I'm sure a lot of you have thought about this, but you know, anyone early in the program, phase 1, phase 2, maybe even phase 3, that is a lot of pressure to put on someone. And even if it's presented to them as a choice, if it's coming from the court, they may not feel they're in a position to say, no, I'd rather not tell my story to the world. So we need to just be really careful in how we use participants. When in doubt, alumni. It's a great way to maintain your relationship with alumni, and it's just as effective. We have to be really careful with participants. No, I kind of went pretty quickly through that, but I thought I would love to just converse with you all about your experiences or answer questions you have, or I find that we often learn something from some stories someone has about either a really great media engagement or a disastrous one, but you know, I think we can just kind of chat. You know? Yeah.
What happened on Pennsylvania?
That's exactly what I'm
So this was like, it was, I remember because it was right before Christmas. So it was like mid-December. Participant in Veterans Treatment Court. News starts to break of a mass shooting in Pennsylvania. A family, 4 bodies were found in the house, gunman on the run. So that's about like 5 in the afternoon. At about 8, I get a call from the coordinator, and she's like, I live in DC, she's like, you haven't seen the news. It's all over the news in Pennsylvania. And at that point, it started to make national news. She said, he's one of our participants. I don't know what to do. Media's calling. I think they might be outside my house. I mean, it was like in a matter of hours, it became a full-blown crisis for this court. And of course, he was still on the loose. So there was nothing that could be said about it. And I remember having a call that night with some folks at NDCP, and there was someone said, well, we need to get out in front of this. And I said, well, how? It's still a developing story. We don't know anything. No one should say anything. Turned out the next day he was found. He had shot himself. The media was swarming. The judge was distraught, right? It's one of his participants, so he's feeling attacked because they're questioning his program. He's feeling responsible because there were many victims in this situation. The participants are feeling like they want to defend the judge. Nobody knows what to say, and there's no media point of contact for the court because for whatever reason, the sort of county level court, they were like, we don't know what to do here. And so this coordinator was kind of on her own, and she was getting bombarded. So the first thing we did is I don't want to bore you with too many details here, but maybe it's revealing, but so we said, look, okay, we got to buy you some time. You have to release a statement, right? It's going to be very short and sweet, and it's going to extend condolences. It's going to ask for, it's going to say that we can't say anything because it's an ongoing investigation and it's going to buy you some time. So they get the statement out the next day. And then we said, you need to pull every bit of information you have about this case. First court appearance, you need every court appearance log, every status hearing. You need to know backwards and forwards every interaction you had, because, at this point, I didn't know if the court had done everything right. It was hard to tell. And we need a point of contact. Who's going to be the media point of contact? We ended up talking to the DA's office, and the DA agreed that all media inquiries that were going to the court should go through her. That was huge. It alleviated a lot of pressure. We then told the court they were supposed to have court in 2 days. And we said, you can't do that. One, your participants need extra care right now. So we worked with them to bring in a trauma specialist. We found an off-site location where they could all meet away from the public lens and just take care of each other. And that bought some time too, because the media was prepared to be in the parking lot. Yeah, and talking to participants. It turned out that the court had done everything by the book, including the home searches. He had agreed to give up his weapons, and they had done everything within their power, within what the law allowed, to search his home. The problem was they couldn't access the database to know if he owned weapons, and they were limited in their search because the law in Pennsylvania, you couldn't move anything. It's a visual search, I guess. I don't really know the term. And so it became a story more about sort of policy, right? And how is this allowed to happen where this person has the guns, but the databases aren't communicating? And the media just sort of veered off onto that. And had we inserted ourselves or tried to get ahead of it, we would have kept the attention on the court. Because in a story, in a situation like that, every single time you release a new bit of information, it's a new round of articles, right? Every single time. So we had to be really careful about that release of information. And we packaged everything up. We got it to the DA. She delivered a press conference. She basically carried the message that the court had done everything within its power, and the pressure started to ease. And then we worked with them on sort of post-crisis, rebuilding trust in the community. They had a year or 8 months later, they had a graduation. They invited some media to attend, and they sort of built it back. Oh, the other thing is the judge, a day and a half into it, the judge said, well, I'm just going to invite everyone. I'm going to go out to these reporters, and I'm calling a press conference. And I'm just going to answer every question they have because I have nothing to hide. And I said, well, Judge, I understand that impulse, but that's not a good idea, because you can't speak to this. They're going to be asking you things you can't speak to, and it's not going to look good if you're up there and you don't know the answers. You have to wait. You have to be very strategic in how and when you talk about this. And thank goodness he heard that message. But it was like a 6-day sort of incredible ordeal and crash course in crisis communications. And most crises are not nearly that level of damage, but we see a lot. And I'll tell you, a lot of times it is, it's some sort of HR staff or impropriety issue. And so what the publication talks a lot about is when there is the need for that sort of internal investigation, how to handle that. Where you essentially are saying, we are committed to finding out what happened here, and we will launch an independent investigation, to do so. But anyway, I hope none of you ever have to deal with it.
I appreciate you sharing that story, and it's unfortunate, but also the point that NADCP was right there, and as a resource. I don't think that would have clicked in my mind that you would be called when something happens like that. So that's huge.
We're here for you, but positive
I hear
and
that
negative.
over and over, but I mean, that was real.
Yeah, we were lucky because I knew that coordinator a little bit, and I don't think she thought right away, oh, I'll call NADCP. She literally was like, I don't know where to turn. My phone is blowing up. they're outside my office, they're harassing the judge, and like, I have nowhere to turn, and she called, and I'm glad she did, but, yeah.
So, Bozeman, because I'm from Bozeman, that's why I know Bozeman Daily Chronicle, I laughed a little bit because that's a weird paper anyways.
Yeah.
But we have a media relations with the city. They just don't know enough about us. Like, we've sat down, we've had some conversations. It makes me nervous to have, that's who the point of contact is, but then they don't have any information.
You mean the media?
Yeah, the media will always go to that person
Yeah.
before they come to us, but they don't have that information, and
You
so
mean with they, the media? Or
the media relations individual
Right.
for the city of Bozeman.
Yeah, I think just maintaining that relationship, providing them, if you can put together a one-pager on, some basic language, whatever the key desired messaging is, that sort of boilerplate info, who they should call with the court when they get an inquiry. I think you're just going to want to just keep, like, go see them periodically, like be top of mind with them and encourage them. They're there to get the inquiry, but ideally they're then just funneling it straight to you or whoever is the most, the person who makes the most sense in the court. And that may help because they don't feel like they have to,
Answer that
they're not
question.
responding to the media inquiry. They're under no obligation to do that. They just need to be in receipt of it. Yeah.
So I'm from Billings, and I think we have 7 drug courts in Billings.
Yeah.
And
You get a lot of press.
no, Judge
Judge
Nicely
Nicely.
does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, and I don't mean this,
Yeah.
but I want some of it. How do us, because we don't have the huge 130 people in our court.
Yeah.
Every one of the courts are different. How
Yeah.
do we differentiate, and let people know?
I would try to focus on what it is about the program that is different, or what is the unique story there. And it may be an individual. In other words, it may be that, a graduate, and again, not a participant, but someone who's graduating, who's got just some kind of exceptional story.
Yeah.
It may be an innovation you all are doing. What is it that is special and differentiating? And kind of focus in on that and make that the hook. Because that's an interesting point. Billings, not a huge community, but with all this treatment court infrastructure and a big, one of which is sort of a big media magnet,
Right.
I can understand that.
Well, she's larger than life, and
Yeah.
nobody will ever,
Yeah.
deny that.
Yeah.
Like even within my family, my court here, they really don't understand what I do. And they're like, Mom, there's 7 courts in Billings. Really?
Yeah.
These other ones, and we're all very specific on who we take, and we don't step on each other's toes.
What's your court?
I'm the adult felony drug court.
So that right there.
I take the worst of the worst.
I was just going to say, that right there
Uh,
is interesting, right? So,
So when
I
you're saying
think-
alumni, I have the perfect person.
yeah, well, I think that maybe is the cornerstone to a story, right?
Mhm.
That idea of like, the more serious cases,
Yeah.
those cases, those people can, their lives can be transformed. This can work for them. And it can even be presented as like, this is unique among the courts and Billings, but it's working. I would think about that angle. And do a multi-pronged approach. I mean, maybe it starts with an op-ed, a few weeks before you have a graduation, and then that becomes another media event. And, if you have alumni who are out in the community doing impressive things, or is there a business that's been hiring some of your alumni? All of those things can be.
Oh, well, the one alumni I'm thinking of, he started his own business and was very successful.
Yeah. So, I think there's a lot to work with there.
Okay.
But I can understand why
you know, and
You would be challenged,
yeah,
right?
you know, I mean, Judge Nicely has her graduations and there's all these grand affairs and,
Yeah.
you know, we have ours and we want them to be grand affairs, maybe my best.
And maybe it's not a graduation.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you think, okay, well, graduation, Nicely's kind of got the market cornered on the big graduation.
Right.
What's something we can do that's different?
Well, we're gonna do a pickleball training,
Yeah,
so maybe hopefully Parks and Rec.
yeah. But that population you serve makes you unique, and that's a good thing for engaging media. Yeah.
So, just as far as like dealing with the media, so say, you know, you're inviting them to graduation, I don't want to necessarily, you know, impede on our graduates' big day, or
Yeah.
right on their, you know, or essentially make them feel like they're on the spot. Yes, exactly. And so you know, it's like, well, you can, I guess you can invite the media to graduation, just see how it goes, but then you're not really controlling the message. It's just, you know,
Free for all.
yeah.
So one thing is, I would encourage you, if you're going to invite media to the graduation, to talk to your graduates, and if any, you give them the choice. If you do not want to be in a media story, let us know, and then have a list of who has agreed and who hasn't. The media is actually very respectful of that, super respectful of that. Like you can, I've done a few graduations in DC, and in the DC Corps, for whatever reason, usually like 9 out of 10 of the people graduating are like, I don't want to be featured in anything. They will always, the media has always been respectful of that. So that's one thing, but the other thing is, you know, if you're inviting the media to a graduation, you know, think about what information you provide for them, but then there's going to need to be someone designated to like meet them, be their point of contact, get them set up, you know, let them know that if they want to do any interviews, they have to flow through that person, so that it is a little bit more controlled and they're not just kind of, I mean, in that post-graduation when everyone's sort of milling around and hugging, then they're just grabbing people, that it's a little more controlled than that. But it requires the core team to have one person designated to really coordinate that. Yeah. What else? Anything? How's the media with the Veterans Treatment Court, I imagine?
We've had quite a bit of positive exposure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we've had that much coverage of graduation. We normally have senators or the politicians, designated representatives, and local community leaders that are going to congratulate them and wish them well.
That always draws out
Yes.
for us, yeah. That's another good point too. When you get a positive media hit, think about who do you want to send that to? You know, whether it's county commissioners or the mayor's office or your members of Congress. You know, send it to the district office. Hey, we got a great media coverage of our court in your jurisdiction. You can always use that stuff to help further that support among elected officials.
Our local media, we did a 3 Marine graduation. They all graduated at the same time, right around, well, the day before the Marine Corps birthday.
Yeah.
So we made a big deal out of it. And we had the media there, we had the plan. They were very respectful of the 2 that wanted to be on camera and the one that didn't. And then they interviewed me, and they got my name wrong, they got the court wrong, they got everything. They had a press release and everything that had all of that. And I was like, oh, thanks guys. So we called the next day and just said, hey, by the way, this was all of the information. And they did correct the story on the website, but the video was never going to be corrected. And so that was so tough because we had done everything that we felt was right. The press release was out. We had it perfect to do that message. And I even spelled my name. I said my name. I spelled it on the beginning of that.
And they still got it wrong.
And they still got it wrong.
Well, first of all, you did the right thing. You know, you can always call, hey, you know, your caption in your picture misidentifies so-and-so, they'll generally fix it. Man, like, they get stuff wrong.
Yeah.
They get stuff wrong all the time. That's not, I'm not making any sort of statement about the media, it's just they get stuff wrong. And yeah, it happens.
Do you have a template for like a press release?
Yeah, there's a template in the media guide.
Okay.
It's usually, it's very straightforward. It's, you know, who, what, when, where, why, with a little bit of the about, you know, boilerplate, ready to go about language, and whoever the media contact is.
I worked for Judge Nicely's back court.
Ah.
I started 2 days before graduation. Talk about hit the ground running.
Yeah.
It was actually the most amazing experience I had ever had because it was a graduation, it was the presentation of the mentor court. So we had the color guard, we had
Oh, I remember,
somebody
yeah.
playing the bagpipes, we had the Star Spangled Banner. Were you there?
No, I wasn't there.
May? It was crazy. So, yeah, I've only been there since May. So it was just absolutely crazy. And now our next graduation, we're going to have 2 days before Veterans Day.
Okay.
So
That'll be
we're going to have another real big, trying to get a lot of bang for our buck.
Yeah. Well, that's, you know, that court has done a great job of building up those relationships. So it's now at the point where you basically just tell them when it is and they'll show up.
Yeah.
I think the thing to think about is there, in addition to the normal great graduation story, which they've done a lot on that court, is there something else you want to focus on?
Oh,
Or a
no.
message you want to get out? I mean, that you can be thinking about that.
Yeah.
Another angle to, you know, a lot of Veterans Treatment Court coverage will play up the hero aspect of those who have served, right? We're doing this because they've served and they've come home and they've struggled. And there's some need now to put a message out there that, yes, that is true, but also we're serving anyone who has served and is a veteran, whether they've been in combat or not. You know, if they're experiencing some clinical issue, we will serve them. Does that make sense? Like that's sort of like, you know, in the early days of Veterans Treatment Court, it's really important to kind of get that message out about why we're doing this, but it's a little different now.
And that's a big thing too, is what we're finding is people are not understanding that they're veterans if they didn't serve in combat.
Right.
So they're not identifying themselves as veterans, so they're going over to other courts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's something to think about in your messaging. You know, we have to move a little bit beyond the way we've been messaging about Veterans Treatment Courts and really make it about, this is not about whether you served in combat or not.
You went to boot camp. We're here for you.
Yeah. Yeah. You signed on the dotted line. This is something you said reminded me, you know, and I was thinking about your particular issue. Local public radio is a really good outlet because all of the NPR, so there's national public radio and then there's obviously every state, you know, there's local NPR affiliates, but they all feed the national. And usually, you know, that's a good outlet for a little bit more sophisticated coverage where you're not going to be restricted to, you know, 2 to 3 minutes. And I'm thinking about, you know, that your story about sort of like this other population that doesn't get talked about a lot when it comes to justice reform. That might be one, they might be an interesting outlet to target for that because they'll give you, those pieces tend to be just a little bit longer and a little more nuanced, which I think you're going to need if you're really trying to kind of message out about this population. So.
Well, because I got a judge who, he's like, he wants to take his show on the road by talking to community members about how much, you know, our court saves, and Billings is rather conservative. And so we've gone out on the road and, you know, talked about our healthy babies. Talked about, taking them out of jail and putting them to work, taxpayer dollars saved. So I think
Yeah.
that's the big thing in bills.
Yeah, yeah.
And do you feel that the radio bits are more receptive or less or equal to, these stories of treatment courts than say, mainstream media outlets?
Not necessarily. You mean like local TV?
Or just like the NPR sort of reference there on that local scale? Do you feel like they have equal reception to say, TV and those sorts of things?
I think so. With the local TV news, I mean, it's like a machine, right?
Mhm.
They're just grinding out those stories, and that's not I'm not being negative about them, but they'll give you your 2 minutes,
Mhm.
right? And that's it.
Yep.
I think the advantage so they're equally receptive, but I think the advantage to like an NPR style outlet is that they are interested in a deeper dive.
More
So that
content.
piece is going to be longer. It's going to be 4.5, 5 minutes, or longer, and it has the potential to feed into national in a way that the local news doesn't. The local
Unless you have a
news
crisis.
pitches are
And then that does feed into the national, but yeah,
yeah.
you don't want to be on that.
Yeah.
So would that also, like the local PBS station?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Those are great outlets, particularly for new ones. And you can also, like, I am not an expert in the media landscape of Montana, but we can also be looking beyond the local paper, the local television news. Are there criminal justice focused blogs out there or podcasts? Even if it's not Montana based, the Marshall Project's a good example. It's a really prominent online only outlet all about sort of justice system reform. That's a great place to be submitting. They're not going to come cover stuff, but you can write an essay for them, pitch them on different ideas like that. Having alumni write something. We did a piece with a graduate from Maine in the Marshall Project 5 or 6 years ago, and it ended up blowing up on social media and other places. So you're not restricted to you're restricted to your local media for some of the event-specific stuff, but just like Chelsea and the Washington Post, I mean, pay attention to kind of what's out there nationally. There's an opportunity for you to weigh in. Well, it's 5:12.